Now we're going to talk to Jonathan Kim from ReThink Reviews. He's got a review of 8, the Mormon proposition for you guys. As we always do, we'll show you the clip first, come back, talk about why the Mormons care so much about this issue, etc. So let's watch first.
We ask that you do all you can to support the proposed constitutional amendment by donating of your means and time to preserve the sacred institution of marriage.
Means and time is part of a vow ceremony that Mormons perform in the temple, where we promise to give of our means and our time to defend the church and to forward its mission. And we're told that we will lose our eternal salvation if we don't keep that promise. So when Mormons heard means and time in their prophet's call, it was like code. They got the message.
For most Americans and most of the world, November 4th, 2008 will be remembered as the night Barack Obama was elected president. But if you're gay or support equal rights, you know that something terrible happened that night that almost took the air out of all that joy and optimism. It was the passing of Proposition 8, an anti-gay constitutional amendment declaring that only marriages between a man and a woman are legal in California, invalidating an earlier California Supreme Court ruling that banning gay marriage was unconstitutional. How could this have happened in America's most liberal state? The biggest culprit was the Mormon Church, which flooded California with money and manpower, often illegally due to the church's tax-exempt status. The true extent of Mormons' unprecedented involvement in Prop 8 has been a closely guarded secret. That is, it was until the release of the new documentary 8, The Mormon Proposition.
When the California Supreme Court issued its ruling in the summer of 2008, the Mormon Church sprang into action. The makers of 8 got a hold of a secret recorded statement from Mormon leaders, telling followers around the world that they had to do whatever they could to ensure Prop 8 passed. And this was no mere suggestion. Mormons believe that their leaders talked directly to God, and using coded language, they essentially threatened Mormons' eternal souls if they didn't give their time and money to ban gay marriage. And since the Mormon Church demands absolute obedience to church leaders, and the church knew how much its members could give through tithing records, money and volunteers poured in for signature gatherers, phone banking and canvassing, and a slew of dishonest ads claiming Prop 8 was about religious freedom and protecting children. However, Mormon leaders recognized that their church was seen as a weirdo fringe sect by most Americans, so they were careful to hide their involvement through AstroTurf front groups like the National Organization for Marriage. But the Mormon Church's hatred towards gays goes way deeper than the scattered Bible verses most Christian fundamentalists spew as proof that God hates gays. That's because Mormons believe that to get into the highest level of heaven, you have to be spiritually wedded, or sealed, to someone of the opposite sex, so you can have a spirit family in heaven. It's acceptable for a man to be sealed to multiple women, which creates the basis of the Mormon Church's tradition of polygamy. So essentially, homosexuality and especially gay marriage are seen as attacks on Mormons' concept of the afterlife and a threat to the religion as a whole. But in the end, what's at risk is not the Mormon religion, religious freedom, or cultural morality, but the lives of actual people. In addition to gay couples who are deprived of their right to marry, the film introduces you to people like Linda Stay, a former Mormon who was essentially cut off from her family and the church because she supported her gay son's right to marry. Even more disturbing is the fact that Utah has the highest suicide rate in the country amongst young men, due in large part to the church's zero-tolerance policy towards gays, where one of the church's apostles even told Mormon youth that it's better to be dead than gay, and gay Mormons feel they have to choose between their faith and family and being true to themselves. There's also an interview with a man who tells a chilling story of essentially being tortured while at Utah's Brigham Young University in an attempt to convert him from gay to straight. The Mormon Church took a massive PR hit when its involvement in Prop 8 was revealed, with protests outside Mormon temples, a movement to repeal their tax-exempt status, and a recent, albeit meager, fine for failing to report non-monetary contributions. Because of this pressure, the Mormon Church recently came out supporting an anti-discrimination law in Utah, and allegedly have said they'll keep their noses out of future gay marriage campaigns. But don't be so sure. When you have leaders who claim to speak for God and people willing to follow them without question, any amount of hateful, hypocritical, dishonest crap is possible. Let's remember that the Mormons were persecuted for decades for their beliefs on marriage. And if there is a God, the idea that he'd want his followers to lie to voters and that he'd care more about who we have sex with than what kind of people we are is simply insane. But Mormons are not. Gay marriage is going to be legalized, and the Mormon Church, which didn't even allow black priests until 1978, will be on the wrong side of history yet again. I'm Jonathan Kim, and this is a ReThink Review.
All right, John, I'm trying to figure out why the Mormons care more than anyone else, more than other religious groups, right? And it obviously has to do with this, I think it's having to do with this sealed thing, right? So explain that a little bit better. What does it mean to be sealed, and why does this affects the gay issue so much, gay rights issue so much?
Right, yeah, I mean, I've been trying to figure this out myself. So sealing is basically, it's to seal family relationships so you will be with these people forever in eternity and when you're in heaven. So, like, if a couple has kids, their kids are automatically sealed to them, but the couple gets sealed to each other. And but then the funny thing is that if they get divorced, the husband is free to get sealed to someone else, but the woman can't get sealed to someone unless she's about to get married. And it's very uncommon you can get these seals canceled, but it's very, very rare. But I think the idea is that, since a lot of conservative Christians believe that the Bible says God hates gays, they're sinful, they're terrible people, then the Mormons are afraid that if gay marriage becomes legal, then they will be forced to have same-sex marriages in the Mormon church, have these people sealed, and then which will technically mean they go to heaven, but they're sinners. So how could that possibly be? And it would cause like an ideological schism or something, but...
Oh, I like that. Then the Mormon robot breaks down.
Yes.
They cannot be in heaven, they are sinners. They are in heaven because they are sealed, cannot compute. And then it just, smoke comes out, and that's it, and Utah melts down.
I think that's what it is.
Okay. I mean, look, this is the amazing part. That is so unbelievably goofy to us. I mean, that makes...
Right.
I mean, it blows my mind at how absurd that is. But there are so many people who believe this, with with access to so much money, that they can influence the rest of us. Like, California is only 2% Mormon, right?
Right.
But how much of the money spent was by the Mormon Church on Prop 8? Do you know that?
They were guessing that it was about, in the end, it was maybe, we'll see, I think it was around 71% of all the pro-Prop 8 money came from Mormons. And I think that the final amount was estimated was about 20 million in terms of pro-Prop 8 stuff.
So then let's talk about where they got the money, right? So they go to their followers and they say, come on, let's all hate gay people together, and they collect checks, right? But that sounds okay. I mean, because it's not like they're tricking them. They're saying, we don't want the gays getting sealed. And then people give money. So is there anything wrong with that part? And then is there something wrong with how they spent the money once they got it?
Well, I mean, one thing they talk about in the movie that is really interesting, I mentioned it in the review, is that because the church had the tithing records, every Mormon's supposed to give 10% of their income before taxes. And so a guy talks about it in the movie, like Mormon elders were going to people and saying, well, we think that you can afford this much. And they just sat there and waited for them to write the check. And there's also a story of it's like a family that had maybe 5 kids or something, and these were not rich people. And they gave something like $50,000, like their kids' college fund. They gave because when their prophet says to do it, the prophet is talking to God, and so this is a commandment from God. But the question is whether these donations that were given to the church were tax-free, and then the church then kind of bundled these and then used it for political purposes. And the church, as technically a nonprofit, has tax-exempt status if they don't do political work.
Okay, I'm going to get to that in 1 second. Just let's tackle the first part for a second. Okay, I mean, the problem is once you believe that someone's talking to God, it's hard to argue with them, right? So once they have their complete trust and faith, and they said, this is, my God, my life, my eternal life is dependent on this, and they sit you down and they say, well, give me $50,000 so I can run an anti-gay campaign, there's no debate, there's no discussion, right?
Right.
That's why they have them over a barrel. But in reality, I got word for you guys, and if the Mormon Church is going to, hate me because of this, I'm going to take my chances. They're not really talking to God, okay? They just have their own agenda, and they're wasting your money. Please give it to your kids instead. Please, please, please.
Well, there's also this idea of obedience that's really pervasive and hardcore in the Mormon religion, where you're not supposed to question anything the elders say because they're talking to God. And in the question and answer, when I saw the premiere of this in LA, a guy was talking about after Prop 8 kind of, to some degree, kind of blew up in their face because they got all this bad PR. The church came out supporting an anti-discrimination law, and apparently before that, Mormons were polling at something like 15% approval of that law. As soon as the church said we approve of this law, approval went up to 80% in the next day.
Please, for the love of John Smith, use your brains, okay? Just why did God give you judgment? So you could use it, right? Not just lend it out to the senior leaders or whatever they call them. Okay, now let's talk about the tax part of it, the second part. So they bundle it and they use it for political purposes. Well, that's wrong, right? I mean,
Right.
So what's the consequence of that? That's breaking the law, right?
I think
or
that-
is it?
I think there's something about if it's, they mentioned in the movie that as a church they don't have to quite disclose like where all of their money is going. And in the movie they talk about the Mormons got involved in a gay marriage fight in Hawaii in I think 1995. And one of the guys in the movie, this guy named Fred Karger, who has a group called Californians Against Hate, he got a hold of these documents that that basically laid out their whole plan and their communications for what they did in Hawaii. And one of them says, Dear Elder Maxwell, this will confirm the decision made in the meeting of the First Presidency on March 22nd, 1996, that monies previously budgeted for other purposes may be released to the coalition for purposes of media programming and lobbying. So basically, they took money in through donations, they budgeted it for something, and then just used it for something else.
Use it for political reasons.
Yes, and then did not disclose
So
that.
did anybody ever do anything about that?
I don't know if anything happened in Hawaii. What happened in California is that they were recently fined like about $5,000 for late disclosure of
5 or 500,000?
5,000.
That's it, 5,000.
Yeah.
Oh well, then we got him, ladies and gentlemen. We got him. Wow, a $5,000 fine. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was 5,539.
Oh,
actually.
my bad. Then with the extra 539, I mean they're
So-
really in
because
bad shape.
they only disclosed that they had spent 180,000 for Prop 8 purposes. But also, there was also there was phone banking, there was canvassers. I think they were taking Mormons from Utah into California to go and knock on doors and things like that.
They had, in reality, of course, spent millions.
Yes.
So let's get to the final irony here, which is that throughout their whole history, the Mormons have been persecuted and have apparently learned nothing from it.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so tell me about that.
There were two, they're called wars. I mean, they weren't really like battles on battlefields, but there was the Utah War and the Mormon War. And in 1856, they were basically, Utah was kind of off on its own. And during the presidential election, Republicans made it an issue that the Democrats were saying, Democrats had said, well, the territories can kind of do more what they want. And the Republicans said that that this was terrible because they wanted to, quote, prohibit in the territories those twin relics of barbarism, polygamy and slavery. So the Utah War was basically the army going up and saying, like, listen, like you guys can't be doing this. But the Mormons thought they're coming to kill us all, and so there was like basically a standoff when the army wasn't allowed to come into the Salt Lake Valley. But then also
They sound like the original Tea Party guys. Like, the government's coming for us. They're coming for us. We better strike first.
right. And the Mormon War was in 1833, and that was in Missouri because Joseph Smith had said.
Joseph Smith, my bad. I said
believe-
John Smith earlier.
Yeah, Joseph Smith. He had said that basically that the Garden of Eden was in Jackson County, Missouri, and
obviously.
so and that they should make the city of Zion there. So all these Mormons started coming into Jackson County, Missouri, and then people there got upset about the Mormons are going to have all this political power. And so they started stopping them from voting, and then like fights and skirmishes broke out. But I mean, the Mormons were chased across America. Basically.
And eventually Joseph Smith was killed.
I believe so.
Yeah, no, I know. I've read about that. And they were like, yeah, this crazy polygamist with this, with this whole tribe, and they viewed them as unholy, unchristian, right? And so that was the issue. So but as you were talking, I figured it out. You know what it is? They're so bitter that the United States took away their polygamy. They're like sexual thing that they did, their sexual acts that were outside the norm. They're like, oh yeah, if we can't have polygamy, well they can't have gay sex.
Right.
Okay. And it's just a massive strike back. Okay.
Well, what's interesting is I mean, the Mormon Church's official position on polygamy is that they're totally against it, and if you do it, then they throw it out of then you'll get thrown out of the church. But it's like actually in their kind of founding documents, and Joseph Smith was all for. He was like, people think that like plural marriage isn't important to getting into heaven. They're totally wrong. And like I said, they essentially believe in polygamy in heaven. That men will have multiple wives who they're sealed with, and that it's okay. Like, and you can also seal people after they're dead, which is a weird thing too.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah,
So-
yeah, that might come in handy one day. Okay. By the way, in case you want to, just real quick, last thing. I read a little bit about the history of Mormonism too, and when Joseph Smith first came up with the idea of polygamy, it's because he wanted to have sex with his maid. Okay, I'm dead serious about that. And he's like, "Come on, she's really hot." And since he's talking to God, all the morons believe him. I mean, Mormons believe him. And then, except the one person who didn't believe him, his wife.
Right.
Okay, of course. She's like, "Oh, really? Oh, you talked to God, and He said you should have, stick the maid, huh? Well, that's a funny conversation you had with God. And then, of course, Joseph Smith later comes to find out that God tells him to have sex with even more women than just the maid. Okay, the one person not buying it all along was his wife, who was very involved in the church and building the church, right? So look, the whole thing's a joke. Unfortunately, they've made it real, though, with all the money that they're spending on these political issues and keeping other people from having rights that we all enjoy. All right, look, Jonathan Kim's from ReThink Reviews. You can check it out on YouTube, Huffington Post, rethinkitReviews.net. John was also on the last 2 editions of What the Flick. All right, so you can check that out on our YouTube channel for What the Flick Show. And I'm actually going to check it out. Apparently, you guys went mental over Toy Story.
We loved Toy Story.
Okay, and like they talked it up so much that I'm going to have to go. So I hope you're happy with yourself.
I am happy with myself. You should see that movie. Everyone should see that movie.
All right, he's very strong on that.